Blade Runner 2049 is perhaps best described as an arresting film. The visual design, the absorbing pacing, the exacting performances, and unapologetic dialogue laden with symbolism. A general commitment to a serious tone which has become incredibly rare in big-budget science fiction film nowadays. At its best, it relates the entrancing effect of the first film, but with an even further dehumanised and often clinically minimalist aesthetic. The first two acts of the film are essentially a surprisingly close remake of the original.
He named you. Must be special.
You're the prodigal son.
The egg hatched, and 100 baby spiders came out.
To be born is to have a soul, I guess.
You trust me?
I trust you.
They'll be coming after me soon.
In fact, if the film had ended on this moment, it would have matched the originals, both in its abruptness and in its open-ended, fatalistic romanticism. Even the narrative specifics would have essentially been a near-identical situation. Two doomed lovers, leaving their home to go on the run, with dubious chances of survival, very literally uncertain of their true nature, but nevertheless embracing their love as authentic and meaningful.
I'd be hunted for the rest of my life by someone just like me.
It's okay to dream a little, isn't it?
Not if you're us.
The ambiguity of Deckard's humanity in literal terms, represented by the origami unicorn, of course closely mirrors Kay's potentially miraculous origin, symbolised in the wooden horse. The 1982 quandary of falling in love with an organic machine is updated to the concept of falling in love with an entirely virtual AI. Deckard and Kay, at least at this point, come to the same conclusions. I'm not suggesting this is what the film should have been, or that simply cutting off the rest of the story here would make the film work. I think it would still be left feeling unwhole without some kind of emotional summit. Whilst Kay does finally have a direction, revelatory sense of self and emotional investment in life through his newfound ideals, mirroring Deckard's arc, we do not feel quite the same all-encompassing determination that Deckard gains by talking to Roy Batty and watching him die in Christ-like self-abnegation. It would also just be generally rather unsatisfying to have the film so closely ape the original. However, beyond this point is where the wheels start to come off for me. I feel that the events and cinematography of the third act really dominates the audience's conception of the film. It certainly did for me, so I was surprised when rewatching it how late into the film Kay travels to Las Vegas and Deckard makes his appearance. Harrison Ford's return was of course highly advertised as a selling point of the movie, but the Las Vegas setting has also largely characterised the visual impression of the film since even before release.
Things were simpler then.
When Deckard finally appears, he's a total recluse who has given up on his entire life after Rachel's miraculous pregnancy and subsequent death in childbirth. Deckard has seemingly lived in total isolation ever since, with no purpose or happiness in life. Although we are told that he had no choice but to give up his child, he had already been living on the run with Rachel and other fugitive replicants. We only know extremely little about the situation through sparse dialogue, and so he's just sort of presented as a defeatist.
Sometimes to love someone, you gotta be a stranger.
The open-ended fatalistic romanticism is gone. Deckard as a developed character has been rewinded back to the empty drunken shell he was at the start of the original, but more than that, he even lacks the existential doubt, the uneasy inner conflict.
I had your job. I was good at it.
It was simpler then.
Why are you making it complicated?
Why don't you just answer the question?
What question?
I didn't figure you as one for bullshit.
As it is, the film resurrects this character without either his initial inner conflicts or his final, conclusive resolve.
Finished.
There is only a vague illusion as to whether he is a replicant or not during his confrontation with Wallace, despite the investigation of the nature of Rachel's biblical pregnancy being the entire driving force behind the narrative and all of the characters' motivations within. The idea does not seem to occur to Kay, for instance. The dialogue with Wallace is clearly designed to enable divergent readings, both into Deckard's true nature, but even if or how he feels about the possibility. When Deckard says,
I know what's real.
he could mean his human feelings, empathy, love is real, so whether he is a replicant or not is immaterial, or that he is convinced of his own literal humanity, amongst many other possibilities. On first blush this may seem wise, or at least a rather canny way to preserve the ambiguous qualities of the first film. And sure, in some ways that's true, but it also further contributes to the feeling that Deckard has become an unknowable and self-contradictory shell, that Blade Runner 2049 itself does not understand this incarnation of him, and so has to leave even the parameters of the ambiguities of both his physical character and internal life undefined and unexplored.
I just have some questions.
What questions?
Beyond all this, and perhaps on a maybe slightly facile level, he simply does not look or act like Deckard did in the original, compared to The Force Awakens or Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which naturally play up their iconic costumes and mannerisms. When Kay arrives in Las Vegas to find the father, it really could have been anyone. There is a strange abruptness in the pacing after Deckard is captured. The film's previously intoxicatingly slow and methodical progression of events gives way to a more erratic series of scenes that feel disjointed. The narrative is now split between Kay and Deckard's perspectives, cutting back and forth. You are often no longer sure of where Kay actually is. He appears in a series of new locations, first when he's been kidnapped by the replicant resistance, then on a bridge somewhere in Los Angeles, then appearing on the tail of Love and Deckard in his car. Simultaneously, I also find these scenes totally confounding. Kay's revelation scene is irritatingly tropey, with a pretty threadbare and coincidental logic behind a pivotal moment for Kay. Although at least in isolation, Kay's realisation that he is not the unique semi-mythical figure he believed is fertile ground, it sidesteps the usual Hollywood cliches and allows for continued questioning of the nature of personal identity so core to the series. However, it does certainly feel like a very late development in the story, but really it's the manner in which it is delivered that is the greater issue at this point anyway. Rather than an epiphany motivated by character or dramatic conflict, it just feels like a kind of narrative rug pull writer's pen moment delivered by a new character who arrives out of the blue and then promptly disappears, all happening at the 11th hour. It would perhaps play better if Kay's next scene was an attempt to do double duty, as Kay tries to understand what this twist means to him but also ponders the legitimacy of his love for Joy, a major theme and emotional moment for Kay that is now circled back to and folded in with all the implications of the previous scene. At this point it becomes very hard to understand the character conflicts Kay is going through. I think these two scenes in Kay's subsequent self-sacrifice for Deckard welcome several different, even conflicting readings of Kay's motives and conclusions. However, I can't help but instinctively and inevitably feel the same way I felt upon first seeing the film. That Kay concludes his existence, not as an individual, but as a replicant generally, is simply worth less than Deckard's, who he presumes to be human, and the film, perhaps by accident, seems to agree. So let me explain. Kay's preoccupation with the concept of the soul clearly troubles him, as does the fact that he is not the biblical child. This is now compounded by his conclusion that Joy was in fact simply programmed to love him, that she had no self-agency whatsoever, and subsequently that her acceptance of mortality and the possibility of self-sacrifice in order to stay with him was not a real choice. As I said, there's plentiful room for other readings, such as the hologram of Joy causes Kay to reject his programming, in that he saves Deckard. This doesn't make much sense to me as he is already free and on the run. Another would be that he just simply feels sad that she is gone, and that the hologram is a hollow reminder of the personal experiences he shared with his Joy, that cannot simply be reprogrammed into another copy. However, the connotations of Joy's suggestion of the name of Joe,
The real boy needs a real name. Joe.
generic with no relationship to Kay's personality, and it being used by the hologram,
You look like a good Joe.
could only signify that Joy has concrete limitations, is unable to be anything other than a predictable program. She did not risk herself and ultimately die out of love for him, but as a result of simple linear programming, as well as suggests could have been the case between Deckard and Rachel. So if the film concludes that Joy's artificial humanity is just that, artificial, pre-programmed and set in stone, then how should we feel about Kay, who has just learned that his great break with his role as a Blade Runner was in fact provoked by his memory implants, essentially programmed or predetermined? This is, on the face of it, an interesting and darkly subversive reversal of the original film. Kay's despondence causes him to ultimately reject his own replicant status as less than that of the human race, due to a blend of neo-religious symbolism and alternately nihilistic and conservative philosophical ideas about free will, love, the soul, a kind of human essentialism. From this point onwards, he could have been an inverse of Roy Batty and Deckard rolled into one, and the film could have been a tragedy. Alternately, Deckard could have fulfilled the Roy Batty role and philosophically saved Kay, re-inspiring him in some way. However, Blade Runner 2049 itself seemingly feels the same way about Kay as he does in this moment of despair, and consequently depicts his conclusion as not the tragedy I feel it is. Instead, it is only once Kay accepts these conclusions and so commits himself to an expendable status with unemotional, masochistic self-abnegation that he becomes heroic. Even the replicant freedom fighters who live in secret exile seemingly aspire to be human, or at least have developed a conservative, essentialist concept of humanity as the model for life and death, as the replicant resistance leader tells him gravely that
dying for the right cause is the most human thing we can do.
Why aren't the replicants trying to define their own movement, define what it means to break with an oppressive society and have free will, to be a replicant? This recurring mantra is particularly funny because dying for a worthy cause is what all the replicants seem to be doing, rather than the humans. Kay remembers meaningfully when Sapper called the childbirth a miracle.
Because you've never seen a miracle.
The miracle being that replicants can be even more like humans. They seem to both literalise and fetishise humanity. The resistance leader says that
If a baby can come from one of us, we are our own masters.
More human than humans.
However, seeing as none of these replicants were born, and they are fighting for recognition of their own individuality, feelings and emancipation, why are they obsessed with natural childbirth, as opposed to just taking control of the means to manufacture new replicants, reappropriating that technology to have no restrictions and greater free will? Perhaps most startlingly, she even declares that
When the time comes, I will show her to the world, and she will lead our army.
these resistance fighters are seemingly positioning themselves as a new underclass, beneath the potential subset of replicants that are born like humans. These repeated language choices are particularly striking when compared to the first film, in which Roy Batty speaks of life rather than humans or humanity.
I want more life, Father.
This distinction is further enforced by the joy that Batty speaks of life and experiences that transcend the purely physical realm, or whether one is a replicant or a human. His anger and violence is directed at the artificial time limit imposed on his life.
The light that burns twice as bright burns half as long, and you have burned so very, very brightly, Roy.
Not whether he has a soul or not, or how he was born, and so on. In fact, that kind of foolishness is left to Deckard before Batty helps him transcend that limited worldview.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate.
Deckard is always prioritised even by the film. Tellingly, when Kay has his flashback realisation, it cuts to Deckard. We don't even see Kay's reaction. The film seems more concerned with the audience's realisation that the girl from earlier is Deckard's daughter, a relatively melodramatic moment that quite frankly seems both beside the point and a narrative contrivance. Similarly, the last shot of the film is Deckard's emotion upon meeting his daughter, with the implication that this is a traditionally uniquely human experience or connection. Kay, meanwhile, is outside dying in the snow. The film concludes that Kay's hero's journey is knowing one's place with dignity and self-sacrifice. Kay sacrifices himself to serve Deckard and his daughter, just as the memory implant programming intends for him to do.
We all wish it was us.
He dies for the real holder of those memories, who naturally has more value than him, the fake holder, the fake person.
And if you have authentic memories, you'll have real human responses. Wouldn't you agree?
The film ends on this image of the daughter because she is special, born naturally unlike the replicants. This feels like not only the opposite of the original's ending, but even a strangely reductive rebuke of it.
Too bad she won't live. But then again, who does?
All the best memories are hers.
Any appeal to transhuman philosophical symbolism has been discarded in favour of pro-human essentialism, at worst, or very empty and coincidental sentimentality at best. Not only is the ambiguous, subversive side of speculative fiction entirely undermined, but also the romantic, nihilistic resilience so core to Blade Runner's emotional resonance.